Birth and death are the boundary limits of the life of every being on the planet. These are two sisters who complement each other, two halves of the whole, who constantly touch and interact. Each is the start of something new, at the same time both symbolize the completion of another cycle of being. And if we associate only pleasant and joyful moments with birth, then the end of life, approaching daily, scares the unknown. What is the death of a person? What will happen next? Let's figure it out together. What is death? The world is designed in such a way that all creatures living in it go through several stages: birth, growth and development, maturity, aging, death. Even representatives of inanimate nature go through such cycles. Stars and galaxies, for example, as well as various social objects, organizations and powers. In short, nothing in the physical world can exist forever. Everything has a logical beginning and an equally appropriate end. What can we say about living creatures, insects, birds, animals and man? They are designed so that the body, after working for a certain amount of time, begins to wear out and stops its vital activity. Death is the final stage of life, which becomes a consequence of a deep, severe, irreversible dysfunction of vital organs. If it occurs due to natural wear of tissues, aging of cells, it is called physiological or natural. A person who has lived a long and happy life falls asleep one day and no longer opens his eyes. Such a death is even considered desirable. It does not bring any pain or suffering to the dying person. When the end of life was the result of adverse circumstances and factors, then we can talk about pathological death. It occurs due to injury, asphyxia or blood loss, and infections and diseases lead to it. Sometimes death is massive. For example, in the Shiv century, the whole of Europe and Asia was covered by the bubonic plague pandemic. What is the Black Death? This is exactly the terrible pestilence, the pandemic that has claimed the lives of 60 million people in 2 decades. Atheists believe from different points of view that the end of human existence, its transition into complete non-existence, this is how death can be characterized. This, in their opinion, is the death not only of the physical body, but also of the individual's consciousness. They do not believe in the soul, considering it a peculiar form of brain activity. After the heart stops beating, the grey matter is no longer fueled by oxygen, so it dies along with other organs. Accordingly, atheists completely exclude eternal life and the immortality of the soul. As for science, from its point of view, death is the natural mechanism that protects the planet from overpopulation. It also ensures the change of generations. Each subsequent one of them achieves greater development than the previous one, which becomes the starting point for the introduction of innovations and progressive technologies in different spheres of life. Instead, religion explains in its own way what human death is. All the world's famous faiths emphasize that the death of the physical body is not the end. After all, it is just a shell for the eternal, the inner world, the soul. Everyone comes to this world to fulfill their destiny, after which they return to the Creator in heaven. Death is only the destruction of the bodily shell, after which the soul does not cease to exist, but continues it already outside the body. Each religion has its own ideas about the afterlife, and they all differ significantly from each other. Each of us is mortal and is guaranteed to know the answer one day, but no one can tell about the results of these observations. Every religion talks about the continuation of life after death, where a heavenly place of eternal prosperity is prepared for some, and others will have to answer for their misdeeds. Many famous philosophers have tried to explain what eternity can be beyond life. In philosophy, the theme of death is almost always associated with the human soul. This was especially true in the distant past, when knowledge was fragmentary and beliefs could be based on a single faith or confidence. The situation has not changed much. Most of us still consider a person as a kind of combination of body and soul. At the same time, the soul here has a not entirely religious meaning. Depending on the author of the idea, it can be eternal or just as mortal, independent or completely dependent on the body or, more precisely, on its actions. However, no philosopher of the ancient world considered death as a complete end, beyond which there is nothing. Plato was one of the first philosophers who seriously began to think about death. He accepted the concept of the existence of the body and soul, where the latter has a divine origin and possesses immortality. On the contrary, the body is not only mortal, but also a kind of prison for the soul. Thus, death is presented as a process of liberation of the soul from imprisonment. In this system of views, death is denied because only the body dies, which, according to Plato, has a secondary meaning. The soul had other bodies before, and in the future it will receive a new body. It turns out that physical death is the beginning of life for the soul. It is unknown how long this freedom will last and when the next shackles in the form of a body will be put on the soul. Perhaps there will be some period of time during which the soul will be able to make a choice in favor of a better earthly life. In addition, you can prepare for this in advance, living in harmony with yourself and the world around you. According to Aristotle's reasoning, all living things consist of soul, body and matter. Every plant and animal has a soul, although it is different from a human one. Our soul is responsible for the general well-being and the process of cognition of the surrounding world, and is also divided into two parts. One part is passionate about mental activity, striving to create an environment where it can thrive with the body. The other half of the soul is poetic or creative. It makes a person unique. It is this part that is considered immortal and eternal. It follows from this that death is not just the biological end of life, but the process of complete separation of the body from the immortal part of the soul. Being an intelligent entity, the soul calmly goes through this stage. It retains its immaterial appearance and is still able to perform the main function, to think. Epicurus views death as something inevitable and natural. Therefore, a person should take it for granted and consider it an integral part of life. Despite such a simple and logical design, there is one problem. We're afraid of death anyway. According to the Athenian philosopher, this position is absurd because as long as we are alive, death does not exist. So there is no reason to worry either. He gives 2 tips that will help you stop being afraid. Know what you want and remember every day that you will die one day. At first glance, the tips seem strange, so let's look at them in more detail. You need to know exactly what you want from life. It will make you focus on today. Satisfaction of needs will make life more pleasant and complete. When you are saturated physically and spiritually, you do not have time to fear the distant future. Remembering death regularly, you sort of get used to it and therefore stop being afraid. Death has nothing to do with us, because while we exist, death is still absent. When it comes, we no longer exist. Death is one of the few events that we can expect with complete confidence. Based on this, you need to accept it with humility, maybe even with pleasure. By eliminating the fear of the inevitable, a person gets the opportunity to enjoy the current moment and a fairly long life. Death should be perceived as summing up the results of a life lived. If someone has done, seen and understood enough, then they will leave the earthly world with ease. A person who constantly suffers grief and dissatisfaction should not worry too much. He's unlikely to get any worse. Philosophical ideas that will expand your understanding of yourself and the world. Spinoza is one of those philosophers who denied the existence of an immortal soul. It makes you look at many things from a different angle. For example, being under the control of passions rather than your own mind, you will always be afraid of death and vice versa. Realizing that death is inevitable and there is nothing beyond it. No heaven, no hell, no eternal suffering, no salvation of any kind, you lose interest in endless reflections. If after death everything ceases to exist for a person, then it is not worth wasting time on understanding it. In return, Spinoza suggests focusing attention and all efforts on knowing oneself, one's place in the world, and the surrounding reality. A free man thinks of nothing so little as death, Spinoza wrote. On earth, man is the only living being who realizes that one day he will die. Therefore, we consider death as a kind of phenomenon or event in life. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger argued that each of us was born and exists in order to die later. Moreover, our only certainty lies in this inevitable ending. We know for sure that this will happen. Heidegger gives death a positive tone, considering it a harmonious part of the world. He calls death the last and supreme act of existence. Is there life after death, and what does it look like? Perhaps this is one of the most difficult questions that we may never get an answer to. On the other hand, since no one knows the truth, everyone has the right to choose the appropriate explanation for themselves. Any concept based on scientific evidence, religious beliefs, or personal opinion has the same value. You can believe in the traditional ideas of heaven and hell, in one of the types of reincarnation, or turning off the screen once and for all. The main thing is that the choice brings you closer to a calm perception of the inevitable and does not lead you in circles with endless reflections and fears. You'll find out one day, but you shouldn't rush either. As long as you live, every new day can be the beginning of something amazing. As long as life goes on, it can be changed at your will.